the Talk Station is proud to present The War Files. The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Our guest?
Jack Goldstein.
Jack, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Windsor, North Carolina.
Where were you when the war broke out?
I was in a barracks, enlisted men's barracks at Scottsville, Illinois, waiting to go into aviation cadets. And it was 72 of us in the barracks. And we tried to find out where Pearl Harbor was. And not a one in the 72 could tell where Pearl Harbor was.
So you were already in the Army Air Corps?
Yeah.
Why were you in the Army Air Corps?
Well, I knew World War II was coming. It had to be around the corner. And I wanted to be a part of it. And my ambition was to fly. I enlisted in September of '41. Now, one of the reasons I enlisted was I had a friend, a family friend that was a master sergeant at Langley Field, and he had crewed Hap Arnold and people like that ship in B-17s, and he wanted me to go get my wings and come back to the squadron at Langley Field. And at one time you could do that. So they sent me to Richmond to enlist, and I enlisted with the idea of going through cadets and then going back to that squadron. And as it turned out, the Air Corps or the Army had changed that, and you didn't have any choice. And I went on and enlisted. They told me I would not be able to go back, but I was ready to go and do what I could.
What was it like in your basic training? Was there a discussion at the time that we had to be prepared for going to war?
Well, the thing we talked about more than anything is lack of preparedness. For example, we took a course in the .45 revolver, and they had to borrow one from one of the officers because there wasn't one on the base. We had to do some Army drills and rifle drills, and we did it with a wooden rifle because there wasn't a rifle on the base at Keesler Field. So that's how prepared we were.
The war breaks out. You're finding out where Pearl Harbor is.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What happens next?
Well, I go through radio operator mechanic school while I'm waiting to go in cadets. There was a mix-up in the records. Mine got mixed up, so I got delayed going into cadets. So I was called into cadets, where then I went to Nashville, Tennessee for classification. I went into cadets. It was real funny, just before the World Series of '42. The reason I say that, I had a close friend that was playing for the St. Louis Cardinals that year, who, by the way, won the World Series that year. But he had me tickets for the World Series, and I didn't get a chance to use them but I did make money because I went into cadets lot with a bunch of people from the New Jersey, New York area. Mm-hmm. And they didn't think anybody in the world could beat the Yankees. And I didn't think anybody could beat that ball club the Cardinals had that year. So I was taking all the money I could get hold of, betting on the Cardinals. And of course the Yankees won the first game, then the Cardinals went 4 straight wins against the Yankees. So I was rich for a little while.
Where did you take your primary flying lessons?
I went to Maxwell Field, and then from there my primary flight training was Avon Park, Florida. I got my wings at Moody Field in Valdosta, Georgia in the summer of '43. It's real funny. From day one, every time I filled out a form on what I wanted to fly, my first choice was always twin-engine fighter. And there wasn't but one, that was the P-38. I loved the P-38, that's what I wanted to fly. So going through cadets, I was in in advanced training, I was in a twin-engine training facility. And then we got, the ones of us that were going to go into fighters, twin-engine fighters, got some training in the AT-6, which was a single-engine trainer. And then we went to Eglin Field for about 10 days on air-to-ground and air-to-air gunnery practice with the AT-6. Then when I graduated, they informed me that the P-38 was such a small part of the Air Corps at that time that they only took them from each training command. There was 3 training commands, and one training command got P-38s, and they alternated between the 3. And I missed it by 1 class. So what they did, they assigned me to B-25s, which they said was the closest thing that they had. I had the twin-engine training and went to La Junta, Colorado.
Tell us a little something about the B-25. Everybody knows the B-17 and the B-24, but what about the B-25?
It was a great airplane. It was probably, of your bombers, was more of a pilot's dream to fly than any of the rest of them. It was a great airplane to fly, and I loved it. It was great. And we had some unusual training at La Junta, something that I've never seen in print. All the documents I look at of World War II and everything, I've never seen it mentioned anywhere. But we had training to take off and land B-25s on carriers. Now, in sometime, I don't remember the exact date, but in the summer of '42, Jimmy Doolittle made his raid on Tokyo with B-25s, taking off on a carrier. Of course, they landed in China, and some were successful and some weren't. But that led someone, and Doolittle had taken over the 8th Air Force. I always felt that it was his idea to do it. But what they did, engineering would go out. We had black asphalt runways in the desert area, in the Colorado area. And they would go out in the morning, check the wind, and then they would put yellow stripes on those black runways. And we'd have to land over the first one and stop by the second one. And they had figured it out, Lockwood, that if you were able to stop by the second one, they would have been able to stop you on the carrier. Now, my feeling was I did probably 98 to 99 percentile of my takeoffs, and probably 50% or less of the landings. And so after, I think most everybody was in that kind of category. Holding your brakes and running up full power and everything, you could get a B-25 off real quick. My next assignment was Columbia Air Force Base in Columbia, South Carolina. And the bombing range was at Myrtle Beach. And we had to learn to skip bomb and shoot the 75 millimeter cannon. You know how you can take a silver dollar on water and skip it across it.
Right.
This would skip bombs across into your target. Then all of a sudden, we get notice that we're shipping out. 62 of us were moved out of B-25s into the last phase training of B-17s. Now, what had happened, what we were told, we were losing more B-17s with air bombing than we were training. So they had to pull out some more people that were not as essential and put in the B-17s as quick as it could.
You were also informed that your chances of survival were not very good.
Well, we knew that from the results we were getting. Pulaski All Raid was one of the ones that had a tremendous loss in.
And what happened in that raid?
I think the raid was fairly successful, but we lost a tremendous amount of planes. And I think they looked at the losses. In fact, a documentary I saw recently showed where Roosevelt was real close to stopping air bombing because of the losses were so great. And at that stage, and I think the rest of us felt the same way, we had no fear at that time. Fear came later.
That's where I was going. All right. When did you ship out for Europe?
It was probably March of '44 that we left Savannah and flew to Homestead, Florida to pick up a navigator to fly across the ocean They had special navigators that had that experience. We were at Homestead when we got a call that all B-17s had been called back to Savannah for a tech order change. And the parts for the tech order change were at Wright Field in Ohio. And they were put, we didn't have the plane service then that you got now. They were put on a priority #1 freight to ship them to Savannah. The train had a wreck in the mountains of West Virginia, and we got delayed, so they wouldn't let us go until they got the parts changes. So they got the barracks and everything got filled up, so they sent a bunch of us into town to stay, and we had to check in at 8 o'clock every morning. So instead of all of us, one would check in for the rest at 8 o'clock in the morning. Then we were free till 8 o'clock the next morning. So finally, they didn't ever get the tech, we just got so many of us. They called us in, gave us orders, and put us on a train under the deepest secrecy you ever seen at night and everything secret. Sent us to New Jersey and put us on the Queen Elizabeth with 16,000 troops and sent us to England on the Queen Elizabeth. We were primarily disappointed that we didn't get a chance to fly across the ocean.
The War Files will continue in just a moment with part 2 of the War Files interview with Jack Goldstein. This is the War Files. We now continue with part 2 of the War Files interview with Jack Goldstein.
What was your rank at this point?
Second lieutenant.
What was the trip across the Atlantic like aboard the Queen Elizabeth?
It was crowded.
What time of year were you going?
This was in the spring. We did not have an escort. We went on our own, and they zigzagged across. And they said the Queen told us the Queen Elizabeth, I didn't like it, but it said the Queen Elizabeth was fast enough that the subs couldn't keep up with them, and that we didn't need an escort. We arrived at the base in Scotland, and then we were doled out, and I was sent to the 94th Bomb Group, home based at Bury St. Edmunds, between Norwich and London in England. And we were there through a couple of practice missions. The practice mission primarily was to teach us the formation that we needed in combat, that they didn't teach us in the States.
How many crew were on board a B-17?
10.
Who were they?
Pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio operator, engineer, 2 waist gunners, a tail gunner, and a ball turret gunner.
The B-17 was not pressurized, right?
No, oh no.
So it was cold when you got to altitude.
Oh yeah, it could be 30 below.
What did you wear when you were in the airplane?
Actually, we had a heater that would work sometimes and didn't. And we had electrical suits. And I never could get the coat part of it big enough for me in my shoulders. It gave me the room to fly. So I used a sheepskin jacket with the lining most of the time. And never had any trouble with cold except when flak shot our heater out. We lost our heat and my legs froze. But that's a whole nother story. But that was the only time I ever really had any trouble with
Your first bombing run, when and where?
First bombing run was in April 44 and was to a buzz bomb site.
Wow.
That was what we call a milk run. That was on the French coast. You didn't have far to go in. And I think they tried to give all new crew members that first one. And of course, I got, one of my fears was on my first mission. I couldn't believe the vapor trails. The vapor trails looked like the whole world was coming to an end.
This is the vapor trails from the airplanes.
From the airplanes, from the foreman.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe we had 800-900. Got up to 1,000 to 1,200.
That's a crowded sky.
It is, and when all of them were vapor trails, can you imagine what the whole world looked like? It was frightening.
How many in a formation?
There were two types of formations. You would have a upper, lower squadron and a lead squadron, and your upper and lower squadrons flew off your lead squadron.
All right.
And you even bombed off your lead squadron.
How many in a squadron?
Well, you could have 9 in a squadron, or you could have 15. It would vary depending on what they wanted in the way of bombing and so forth.
All right. So this first milk run in a buzz bomb factory, and interesting. Did you ever, when you were in England, see or hear a buzz bomb?
Oh yeah, several.
What was it like? And of course, the buzz sound.
It was a little frightening at first, but we kind of got used to it. We were so glad to get off the base and get to London that the buzz bombs didn't bother you that bad.
What was it like in London and in England? How were you received?
We were received well, especially Piccadilly Circus with with the women folks.
Right.
But no, we were received well, and the people were good to you. We were, I think, well respected.
We're going to get to the number of missions here in a moment, but back to the buzz bomb factory. What was it like on that first run, and what was going through your mind?
Well, the only thing that really concerned me, I mean, of course, we were looking like real close for German fighters, which we didn't see any on the first mission. But we had Spitfires that took us across the Sound, and that was the last of our fighter escort at that time. I think maybe the vapor trails was the thing that stood out in my mind more than anything else. Is the frightening of seeing so many and the sky just full of them.
I can't imagine that. All right, that was your first bombing run, and that was what year?
That was in would have been in April.
From there, what were your other bombing runs? What were they like?
Well, we had some tough ones. I think about the middle of May, we had a pass coming back from northern France or Germany, that area. We'd come back what in Holland called a Zeta Z. There was less German guns and easier to get it back across the channel. So instead of coming straight back through a big part of the month of May, we would take a tour over Germany and France, just like a sightseeing tour, to draw German fighters up. And see, by that time, the P-51s had come forth. It had wing tanks. So the P-51s in could, 2 waves could take us into the target. And they wanted dogfights between the German fighters and the P-51s. Eisenhower wanted as many dogfights as possible to get as many German fighters out of the sky before D-Day. And probably, I don't know how many lives we might have lost doing that, but how many more we saved by doing that.
How many bombing runs did you make?
Actually, when we got there, 25 was a tour of duty.
Okay.
Then shortly after that, they moved it to 30. And then they moved it to 35, made a tour of duty. So they prorated you according to how many you flew when it was 25, 30, and so my proration should have been 32. And they made some mistake in the office, and I actually flew my 33rd mission. And they didn't tell me until I got back on the ground that I was through, that I had gone 1 mission too many. And I told the colonel, if I'd have got shot down, I'd have haunted you the rest of your life.
I've got to ask the question, did you lose friends?
Oh yes, too many.
Back to the comment you made earlier, you were not fearful when you were going through the training, but now you're going through bombing raids.
I don't think there's anybody can say that there wasn't fear in their hearts. The first night I was in England, we checked in. We had Quonset huts, and we checked in. The officers had quarters one place, enlisted men, and some guy that was already there had a radio going, and he had it on Axis Sally. And all of a sudden, Axis Sally starts naming the crews that came over on the Queen Elizabeth. And then you hear her say, call your name out. I heard the name Jack Goldstein on the radio from Axis Sally, that go home now while you can, because we're going to kill you if you don't.
Wow.
And that was a frightening, the first night in England, you hear that, it was a frightening experience. And it stayed with you for a while.
You had an experience where your plane got hit by flak,
Right.
and you said your legs were frozen. What happened in that experience?
Well, the whole thing, the heater got shot out. I didn't ever use the electric, the suits on it. And my legs got numb. And we were able to land the plane with no problem. And what they did, the first thing they did when I got out of the plane, I had to be helped out of the plane, I couldn't walk. The first thing they did was put me in a vat of cold water. And it felt hot, but it wasn't. It was, and they brought it back, and they said it was no damage done. And put me right back on combat. It was hardly a mission that you went through flak that you can get a few holes in your plane. I think the most holes we got in the plane was when they sent us on a low mission with a B-17, which was unheard of. We went on a low mission that we pick out our target to find any bridge, railroad crossing, railroad, highways, or anything. Find your own target and bomb it. And we got caught with a German flak car of some type, a train car, I think. And it wasn't any serious damage, but about 200 holes at the bottom of the plane. They couldn't reach any further than that with the thing.
The story about D-Day, were you aware that D-Day had started when you took off, or was it something you learned as you were in the air?
Well, we knew it before we took off, that what it was, that it was D-Day. Most of us felt thrilled that we were finally really taking the offensive. And of course, we were praying for good luck for not only for us, but for the boys with on the ground, the paratroopers, and the rest of them.
What was your job that day? What was your...
We bombed the beach here about 7:30 that morning, and we bombed through cloud cover. It was complete cloud. We didn't see anything when we bombed.
The War Files will continue in just a moment. And now, the conclusion of the War Files interview with Jack Goldstein.
You flew 33 missions.
Right.
And what was your last mission?
The last mission was in the Ruhr Valley.
When was it?
It was, I remember it well, it was September the 12th, 1944, on my mother's birthday.
Wow.
And I was able to send her a cable when I got back that I had finished my tour duty and would be coming home.
How much time did you spend in the airplane on an average bombing run?
Counting formation and landing and everything, probably averaged about 10 hours a mission.
All right. What did you do for food? You have to relieve yourself. What was it like?
We had relief tubes.
All right.
And then they have a little package that had some candy, cigarettes, by the way. And
so you smoked in the airplane?
Well, yes.
Okay. I mean, but there was no concern?
Right. Well, I don't know that it was exactly legal, but some of us did. And but
Did you realize that you were in a potentially a dangerous situation?
well, you didn't at altitude.
Well, I'm just laughing because it was a dangerous situation being in the war.
But no, you didn't do it at altitude because you had to keep your oxygen mask on. But once you got back to taking that off, a cigarette in those days tasted mighty good.
At the conclusion of the bombing run, was there a great deal of relief on your part and the part of the crew?
Oh yes, it was. And you land, and the first thing they did, you had interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to know, the first thing is, did you see anything out of the ordinary, ships or trains or anything that you wanted to report, what we call hot news.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went through interrogation of what you thought of the bombing and what's successful and anything that happened, anything unusual in this type of thing. And the Red Cross was always there with some hot coffee, donuts, and you always had a shot of liquor for you when you got back. And the funny part, your last mission was a standing procedure. Your last mission, you took all the team's 10 shots. And I got feeling pretty good by the time I got to the night.
Jack, looking back, and I'm just curious, did the conditions of the war and the mission, did that overwhelm the fear?
I don't know that anything could overwhelm the fear. Anybody that says that they didn't have fear, I don't think is telling the truth.
But what got you going every day?
Well, it was just like a job.
Wow.
You get up in the morning and you go to work.
Wow.
We get up in the morning and we would know the night before whether we were stood down or whether we would have a mission. And I had a rule that when we were going to fly a mission the next day, no one took a drink that night. It got to the point. The Air Corps did a tremendous job of sending you through training. You did some things in training you couldn't understand. But when you look back on it now, they trained you to try to teach you that death was not a factor in the thing. You had a job to do.
You're flying in formation. It's a pretty tight formation. I shouldn't say very tight formation.
Has to be.
You're flying at a preset altitude to a preset point. There's not much you can do to avoid or adjust for flak or enemy aircraft. You have to continue on this course.
That's right.
So you are basically flying straight and level. There isn't much you can do to avoid incoming aircraft. You can't, because of the flak, go up a level, go up an altitude or drop an altitude. You can't. You have to fly as a unit.
That's right.
You really have not much in the way of control of the circumstances around you.
No, you're sitting duck, really. Well, I always said it wasn't necessarily the best flyers that came back. It was the lucky ones.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt I was just lucky to be able to come back, because you see planes shot downside of you. And why did that one get shot down instead of you? It's a weird kind of a feeling.
All right, your last mission, September 12th. What did you do after the last mission?
I took the 10 drinks.
No, but then where did you head? Where were your orders?
Then I had a chance to fly back to the States or take the ship back.
Right.
And I decided I had flown enough, I took the ship and came back on the Queen Elizabeth. Came into New York and then flew to a train to Miami Beach for redistribution. And then we got our leave from there. And then I reported back to Miami, and then my next station was Chinookville, Illinois. Instead of flying, they went at that stage in the fall of of 44, the Air Corps then had decided that they wanted all the officers' jobs to be rated personnel. That's either pilot, bombardier, or navigator. Instead of, we had a tremendous amount in the war of ground officers
Right.
that were not rated personnel. So the Air Corps decided at the end of the war, they wanted every officer in the Air Corps to be a rated personnel. And so I got sent through officers, operate communications, operator and mechanics, similar course to what I had taken at Scott Field back in 41, 42, except it was at Chanute Field.
When did you finish out your tour of duty with the Air Force?
I got out on points in August of 45.
Did you know how many points it needed to get out of the Air Force?
No, I didn't even. I had, I was on a training mission, and my roommate at Chanute Field signed me up to get out. We had talked about it. Signed me up to get out when they did on points when they didn't need me anymore. So actually, I didn't even realize that, and they called me in and told me I was going to be separated. And this was in early August of 45.
What rank were you at that point?
I was a first lieutenant then.
All right. Now, where did you go after the war?
I went back home to Windsor.
Now, when you came home from Europe, still in the Army, Air Corps, did you visit any of the family before going down to Florida?
No, I didn't get to see the family, get back to Windsor until
the end of the war.
Actually, I was separated. Separated at Fort Bragg.
What did you end up doing after the war?
Went back to work. I was with a family business.
All right.
In Windsor. I went back to the family business.
You were on the honor flight back in September. Mm-hmm. Was that the first time you had been to the World War II monument?
Yes.
After the war, what did you do related to your experience in the Army? Did you get involved with any any veterans organizations? What did you do?
Well, I was a member of the American Legion, a member of the VFW, and I took the training I had, and I had a friend that was a Navy pilot, mm-hmm. and we had another friend that was 4F and couldn't get in the armed services, and had trained as a mechanic. It was a civilian mechanic during the war. The three of us formed us an aviation company, and I went to the county commissioners and got a lease for $1 a year, enough land on the county farm, about 1.5 miles, 2 miles out of Windsor, to put an airstrip. Mm-hmm. So we built us an airstrip there, and I went for the dealership, the Piper dealership, for training purposes, and the territory was already taken. But I was able to get the Aeronca dealership. So I had the Aeronca dealership, and I taught flying.
All right.
For several years. Had folks that then we'd teach flying, then we'd sell them an airplane.
Did you, in the process, deal with primarily veterans? Were you working with veterans a lot of times?
Actually, what we did, we set that whole thing up, we set it up to teach veterans on GI Bill. Is
okay.
What we did. But North Carolina, I guess the Department of Public Instruction, I don't even know that much about who was what then, but they made it impossible for a small operator to teach under the GI Bill.
Gotcha.
You had to have restrooms, you had to have special planes to teach the ground part, and they just made it where the big ones could do it, the small ones couldn't. Go across the Virginia line, and all you needed to teach the GI Bill in Virginia was an airplane and a hangar and a license to teach. So that was the difference between the two states. So I taught some GIs, but mostly they were civilians that took the course.
All right. The other question, of course, goes back to the memorial. When you came back and so many World War II veterans did this. They put their uniforms in their drawers, in their bureau, and in their closets, and never worried about their experiences. Why was that?
I don't know. It's just that you've gone through an awful experience, and I think most everybody felt like that. The quicker I can get it out of my mind and go back to the normal life I had before the war, that you just felt like that was the best way to do it.
All right, and of course we have the Korean Memorial, the Vietnam Memorial, and not until 2004 do we have the construction concluded for the World War II Memorial. At any time, did you ever wonder if they were ever going to develop or build a memorial?
I didn't think we'd ever have one, frankly.
Why not?
I don't know. I don't know why it was so long coming. I really don't.
Having seen this memorial, do you feel that it does the effort and the sacrifice justice?
I was greatly impressed with it. I feel real good about seeing the memorial and what he did for it.
Did it have any impact on you? Of course, you were also, I was with you, we went to the Air Force Memorial, which of course had its creation out of the Army Air Corps, which you started. Did those have meanings for you?
Oh yes, I was real impressed, real glad to get the chance to see the Air Force. Well, I was real impressed with it and real pleased on what they did for that one.
Jack, you've looked back over these years. How would you put your experience in your entire lifetime? How would you put your experience in World War II? Where would you put that in your priority list?
What I would say is the number one priority of my lifetime. I've been lucky to receive a few honors along the way, and I appreciate all of them.
What honors besides the Distinguished Flying Cross?
Well, I mean in civilian life.
Okay. Yeah.
And of course I've been Board of Realtors Hall of Fame.
Right.
And I've had quite a few from tourism, the Order of the
Longleaf Pine.
Mm-hmm. And I just got another one the other day, or recently, from the Byways.
North Carolina Byways, NC Byway.
They are the highest honor.
Right.
And I feel a little lucky I was able to, with Humpy Wheeler and myself, we started the Coast Host. Mm-hmm. And with you and a few other local people, I was on the founding board of directors, if you remember,
right,
of the Seafood Festival. I was the only old man on the crowd. The rest of you were. In fact, I think I was the only one really had ever been involved in a festival before.
Right.
And I enjoyed that. And I also, three of us founded the North Carolina Shore and Beach Reservation, which is now Byways.
NC Byway, North Carolina Beach Inlet Waterway Association.
I was one of the founders of that. So I've had an extremely lucky life. Soon be 94 if I live to February. Ooh. And life's been good to me. I feel like my daddy was a Russian immigrant. He came over to this country when he was about 18 years old. And our name really wasn't Goldstein. But when he came through, his Russian name was Zelenkovich. And they couldn't spell it. So they gave him the name of the man in front of him.
Wow.
And that happened to be Goldstein. Shortly after that, his brother came across, and the same thing happened, and the name of the man in front of him was Miller. So they got naturalized citizenship at the same time, blood brothers, one of them Goldstein, one of them Miller. So that was a thing at the time. But when he did settle in Bertie County, he was a peddler. Mm-hmm. And I won't go into all the details of how he got there, but the sheriff told him, says, two of them, and the other one is the grandfather, Lee Lipsitz, that lives in Malawi now. The two of them were together. And the sheriff said, boy, says, you peddle for 6 months. And if you like it and can make a living and we like you, I'll give you a license. And my daddy said that was the first time that somebody had really been nice to him since he'd been in this country. And he decided then if he could make it, that he wanted to live the rest of his life in Bertie County. And he did. He lived the rest of his life in Bertie. And
Wow.
I just feel like that I helped repay our country for what they did for him when he got here.
What you've done for us too, with your sacrifice and your valor in World War II. Jack, thank you very much. I appreciate this.
You've been listening to The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. The War Files is a TalkStation presentation.